Good afternoon, everybody. How you doing?
I have to wait till the 80s to see it. Wait till the 90s. No, I'm going to get out anytime.
Thank you for all being present for this very special panel discussion. It's an honor. First of all, my name is Al Diaz. I'm a one-time graffiti artist and present-day multimedia artist who along with my partner in life, Mariah Fox, curated this, along with Eric Deal-Fellas, Brett, right here. And anyway, this is a super honor for me to put this group of brilliant minds together. Charlie Ahern, director of Wild Style. John Crash Matos, a legendary graffiti writer. Dave Chino, who I only know you as Dave Chino.
It's a 10-letter last name, Valorente.
Okay. Dave Chino, who happens to have played an important role with Beyond the Streets, so he can talk about the subject, which today's subject is specifically the mainstreaming of graffiti, and that's what we're discussing here. That's why these specific people are here. Of course, Lee Quinones. Another, and one of my favorite minds of the East Village or New York, facilitating this discussion is Carlo McCormick.
Hey, thanks, Al. Thanks also for doing this show and for doing it in a way that you got the whole community to tell the story of the movement they helped found, so that's a really righteous way to do it. Thanks everyone for coming out. Thanks to Howl and Jane for always providing a place for us marginal communities, and to you guys for doing it. Now, Professor Diaz here has given us a rather thorny topic, the mainstreaming of graffiti, from which people have been wringing their hands, I think, for a long time. I think it's, kind of, as I was talking about with Al earlier, it's kind of adjacent to commercialization and, all these other notions of that people kind of use as pejoratives. And I'd like to unpack this in a way that's a little more positive. So maybe I'm just throwing out general questions for y'all. I'm not doing specific questions for anyone. I think like maybe if you can each talk about your experiences where you've had to interface with a more mainstream audience versus a room full of heads who know this shit well, and talk about that a little bit. Do you want to just start with you, Lee, or something? Or
yeah,
whatever?
sure. Yeah, thank you very much, Al, Howl, for having me here and being here with friends and family. I have to say that, just removing ourselves from the drama or the spectacle of the event, the act itself, which was the subways back in the 70s and 80s, is that we were, the movement itself was already on a trajectory to creating a conversation about art. And I can speak for myself that when I entered into this huge alphabet soup, as it was at that time, I wanted to create a dialogue revolving around art. And that in itself was already self-commercializing itself in a way, because it was attempting to take it out of the context of that these are vile, vandals that have no direction and no self-worth, and that I wanted to take that and turn it around and say that we did have a voice, I had a voice, and using the vehicle of the subways. So that was already on its way to creating a new open forum that, argumentative or not, it was coming in, it was in the works. So, that in a short story, that's the way I can open up on my side of things.
You want Chino?
Yeah, I can jump in. I started a little later, a little younger than some of the esteemed panelists today. But by the time I was active, We got small glimpses of graffiti on television and throughout, but for the most part, there was no internet, there were no books, there were no magazines. It's hard to imagine, I don't know, there's not many young people in the room, but typically when we do workshops, kids can't wrap their head around the notion that there wasn't an internet at some point. But unlike today, we didn't know who our favorite artists looked like, you know, like Joseph Campbell's Power of Myth, like these stories were kind of hand down from one young generation to the next, you know, with every retelling, they became a little bit more grandiose, and there was no real formal documentation of it. And then occasionally, you know, you turn on the television, and maybe Dreams Don't Die is on, and you see Don D. White's name in the credits, right? Or maybe it's the Warriors, and there were these small glimpses of graffiti. There's a Deadly Spear throw up in the film, and there's an Is the Wiz throw up in the film, and there's a Dean 3YB tag within the film. So I was getting them in these very small glimpses. I have a different relationship with the commercialization, and we can probably, I guess, through the evolution of this conversation, sort of discuss that. But Graffiti Rock was on television, you know, when I was like freshman of high school. So Tat's crew had painted the background, and Don D. White was in the Buffalo Gals video. So, and without getting ahead of myself, it was one of those things where when it was exported to the rest of the world, they saw breakdancing, a DJ, and an MC simultaneously side by side sharing the same space. And I think the notion that like these things all went hand in hand was sort of where the European and the rest of the world walked into hip hop and graffiti. But again, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I believe that graffiti had the hip hop movement, and this is probably later for the conversation, had an enormous hand in sort of pushing the culture forward. And maybe we can discuss that. Yeah. But yeah, we were just getting them in very small glimpses. We were sort of starved for any graffiti content we could get, and if we knew that there was some graffiti in a film, we've probably watched those movies a million times over. And then finally, when Style Wars came out, that was sort of my generation's Rocky Horror Picture Show. You know, you can play it in a room where people don't speak English, and the vast majority of the people in the room can recite it verbatim, word for word. So, but yeah, I'm gonna hand this over to Crash.
How you doing out there? The commercialization, you know, when we were at that point that we were just going from subways into what we were gonna eventually go into, that never entered my mind. We were of that generation of graffiti artists that had a touch of creativity that longed more than subways. I don't know if that makes sense. So we were of that generation. The older guys, you know, that had their ideals, but ours was a little different. We had a voice that was different, and bringing it to that next level, it just, you know, but commercialism, that, or the idea of that, never entered my mind. We just want to expand our horizons, and the conversation that we want to have was that we were equal to anybody else in terms of working on canvas. So, yeah, pretty much it.
But you also paid attention to pop, which of course was already taking a language that was commercial.
Right.
So
Well,
were you thinking in
that was because I grew up reading Marvel Comics, and I was of that generation that saw and got into very early anime, which was, you know, Gigantor, Speed Racer, Kim with the White Lion. All those things were, you know, what inspired my eye. And then, you know, Marvel Comics was, you know, the big one.
Big for Lee too.
Yeah.
How about you, Charlie?
Take the mic. I would just say that to think of it as mainstreaming sounds like the opposite of what we were trying to do. That is, we wanted to make a very radical art film that would be for teenagers, and that it would be something that would represent. Sitting here, first of all, I remember considering Crash for the lead of the film and thinking, well, Crash would be perfect. He lives in the Bronx, and he's like Crash. And Lee was always my first choice for my first love, yes. So in a radical sense, to think that you're going to make a movie with Lee Quinones as the lead is not a commercial idea. It's not. If anyone has ever worked with Lee, it's not a commercial idea. It's an experimental art idea, which means you don't give a fuck. You're really willing to do anything and let the film go take right off the edge of the map, off the cliff, and we're gonna follow that, and just whatever happens, that's the movie, was more what I thought of as our goal. And we did get response from Channel 4 in London, and even before that, ZDF in Germany. And they were the PBSs of Europe. And I was getting letters from the PBS here in our own country, and they said, what? A movie about hip hop? That's only a local subject. We're looking for things that are of national content. One letter. Second letter was, we can't possibly fund a movie about graffiti. That's something we're really not in support of. This is before Henry Schalfein got money from PBS. I'm sorry, we were trying to do that before, and we were not successful. So I'm just giving you a few.
But Henry's a lot slicker than you.
What? Say that again?
Nothing.
And that's no diss to the genius of that movie, which I love. But I'm just saying, our idea of it was more like, we're gonna work with the real people, we're gonna do it in the real location, and whatever happens is good. And it was a disaster from one end to the other. But that's a different story. We will get into something else later.
Well, first, this begs a question, Lee, like when Disney remakes Wild Style, who should play Zorro?
I say Goofy.
John Turturro.
There we go. There we go. That's a good one. Is one of the things that we, our generation in particular, kind of fetishize the notion of subculture? And is that like create, like from the hippies through the punks, through all this stuff, like all this orthodoxy about not selling out and not being co-opted? Is that sort of part of the baggage that we deal with or not? I don't know. For any of you guys?
I think it probably is the first rumblings you hear of resistance from people that are sort of stuck in the same place or haven't. But the truth is that getting older and having milestones in life and having a job and a family and things you care about suddenly change how you feel about risk versus reward when you have something greater than yourself. And it's going to pull you away from the culture invariably. You can't have the same level of commitment at 44 that you did at 18 years old. And the truth is, if you haven't done much between those two times, it's another conversation. But it's not easy, but the truth is that, like, not everyone signed up for this the same way. When I was growing up, there wasn't necessarily a next level or opportunities for people. So, you know, some of the earliest things that I saw as a young person growing up, and I feel terrible that I left out Wild Style, because this was so wildly important to my journey. These two magic moments. It was a segment on Two on the Town that featured you, Pink, Lenny, and a handful of other folks, and then Wild Style. I remember cutting school, and it was the only theater was at the Embassy 3 in Midtown. Yeah. And this is back when
you say Midtown, on 47th
42nd Street.
Okay.
Yeah, so Times Square. But
Yeah,
it was at the Embassy 3.
Yep.
The entire theater reeked of marijuana. And this is when it smelled like someone was burning a car tire in the row in front of you. So I sat there in the movie kind of watching this, but I saw a community of people that looked like myself. And for a culture that was so cloaked in mystique, you didn't know what your favorite graffiti writer looked like. There were these stories that were passed on in the lunchroom of school that kind of went home with you. But the assimilation was so important. And I looked at them and I was like, these guys could all be at my Thanksgiving table. Like, that's my cousin right there and that's my brother right there. And it gave me a certain sense of belonging. So the films were so wildly important to us growing up. But there wasn't a next level or an opportunity. So I think that today, if a kid wants to branch off and get into animation or fine art, like, the opportunities run the gamut. You know, like, there wasn't a lot. Like, in the 80s, people were like, maybe you can do a t-shirt or some tattoos. And I mean, I don't want to get ahead of myself because I have this long line of people that I can talk about that are doing amazing things in a professional space who started their journeys downwind of seeing something written on an illegal subway, like, you know, kind of zipping past them. Yeah, I don't want to lose my thought here. But the point was that there wasn't a next level when we were growing up. So I think a lot of the people that were still doing illegal graffiti is like, oh, you're selling out. But I beg to differ. If you put in your work, how long do you languish in that space after you're king? Like, there has to be more, and not everybody's wired. Some people are still content with seeing their name written on an overpass or on the side of a highway, whereas there are other people that, like, have talents that, you know, I firmly believe that if you're sitting on a talent, it's your responsibility to share it with the rest of the world. So that said, you know, again, the opportunities run the gamut, but there were tons of, like, when I started working at the Source, people like, how do you feel about selling out? I'm like, dude, I rode on a train in '82. It's 1993. I did street, like, I did street bombing, and like I did trains, and I did the whole illegal graffiti thing. Like, trains are clean. How long do I keep it real, right? So I got a lot of it early on, but it was never about selling out. It was sort of about saluting a culture. There was a 30, 40-year window of people that had signed up for this before me. In that narrow window of, like, entertainment we got in '82 from Subway Art, Style Wars, Wild Style, and some of the other things that came out. It was just such a narrow glimpse of the culture. There were like 2 letter trains in all of Subway Art, right? Like, I think it's the Crime 79, the baby, what was it, the Cane One car in the front, and then there's a Is the Whiz in the D Yard, Hell is for Children, right? But it's such a narrow glimpse of the culture. So really, I was just kind of trying to salute the generations of people that came before me, and that's really been sort of my goal all along, is to try and share the things I love with a larger audience of people, and it's sort of education through entertainment. Hopefully you've enjoyed this viral video, the graffiti art show, or book that we did. But there's lessons within it all, and I probably strayed off the topic, and I'm gonna back up here.
That's great. You guys want to add anything to that? That was a beautiful day. But, you know, what you're saying, to follow up on really what Lee said about art, is that for anyone who was in the arts in New York when the writers were killing it, I think that, like, we all recognized it as art. But within that, and as you say, that everyone had their different entry point and their different end point. But there was a bunch of artists who really had all that aspiration, a bunch of writers who had that aspiration of being visual artists. And John, like you did, really, I'm not good on the chronology. I should have studied Owl's Wall better, but you did a show which I think is kind of, in my mind, the first, right? The one you did in the Bronx, Graffiti, GAS, right? The acronym.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah, Fashion Moda with stuff in there. So talk a little bit about, let's talk a little bit about, I never really think of the art world as all that mainstream, but it is a marketplace. So let's talk about the relationship between this illicit activity and this commodified culture.
Well, the fashion moda thing happened just so innocently. He's responsible for that, he and his wife, and I'll tell you why.
Jane,
His wife, Jane Dixon, was doing an installation of fashion moda, and she wanted me to help decorate. She was building a maze that you walk through, and she wanted me to paint on it. So I said, okay. So Knock at that time was starting to live with me because he was sort of without a home. So I said, hey, let's go paint at this place. So we started painting it, the cardboard. So at the time, Steph and Joe Lewis approached me about doing a one-person show in the fall. And I said, okay, whatever. But then I realized, no, wait. Why don't we do a group show? Because I know a lot of guys that are good painters. And just as simple as that, I started calling everyone. And they said, yeah. And we put the show together, and it opened October of 1980. 1980, yeah.
December 1st. Well,
it went
to our generation it was. It's before Key's show. And,
Right.
you know, it's
Village
really-
Voice had the cover
Right.
on December 1st, I think it was, that had a kind of reference to Santa Claus, what was it, Crash?
Yeah.
And it had all
Yeah.
the
It's been that long.
So,
But the front,
On Zephyr Future,
Yeah,
Crash
Crash
and
and Ollie,
Ollie,
yeah.
which was a super splendid way to
Richard Goldstein, yeah.
Richard Goldstein article, but then visually you'll open it up and there is a centerfold of like 8 Henry Chalfant cars on a centerfold, which was like the greatest fantasy
That came-
would have, and there's nothing even remotely like that.
That came either right before or right after the opening of, at the new museum, which is a carryover from Fashion Moda.
Yes, yes.
And then from there, we started doing plans to do something in New Orleans in February, doing Mardi Gras, and yeah. So.
And I would say Sidney Janis did
Yeah,
a show
in
with you
83.
in 83, which sounds like a meat, but
Right.
it is close to that.
Correct.
And
Correct.
I really believe that Sidney Janis, who had made hay with the pop art world in the 60s, felt like, okay, now's your chance, all you collectors out there. If you missed your chance with pop art, get it while it's cheap. Here it is, here they are.
Yeah, and it's so great because it was post-graffiti, so
Post-graffiti show.
we're already talking about post-graffiti in 83. It's sort of like, what are we going to call it now? Post-post? Lee, do you want to talk a little bit,
Yeah.
because you're one of the first guys also before a lot of this stuff, you're going to Europe, because Europe's way more on this than the United States.
Sure.
So about the reception and kind of how it, whatever, it's a different world than where you grew up in.
Well, this is such a long story, but I'll make it as short as possible. In the spring or so of 1978, I created the first ever full handball court mural, top to bottom, side to side, which is right there. And thank you. And that year, that very same year, at the very tail end of that year, Fat Five Freddy had seeked me out and found me trying to acquire my GED at a local school not far from that mural, which that mural, by way, was like, it totally blew everyone's mind. That, I mean, people were looking at it and not realizing it's just a wall that's 30 by 25 feet. How did he do this? And I remember telling Keith Haring many years later, you get a ladder and some cojones. I told Keith that. Get some cojones and a ladder and you're gonna be there. So that wall started the whole notion that there was something happening above ground and something bigger than what was going underground. And Claudio Bruni, who was running a gallery in Rome, Italy at the time, had seeked both Fred and I to seek us out to create a show. So Fred and I, in December of 1979, created the first international graffiti-based show on the planet. Shortly after that, we came back to New York, and in 1980, we did a show at the White Column space down on Spring Street. And I think that might have been on the Springtime, I'm not sure. Charlie might even remember much better than I. But it was like that steamrolling effect that people were now talking amongst themselves. Hey, Lee and Fred did this show, had this massive show. They sold out the show in Italy, Rome, Italy. What is that about? So that conversation quickly, almost overnight, became this notion like, this is much bigger than ourselves, and that there is a trajectory here that we need to rightfully follow. And I think even the MTA itself, it wasn't within their purview to actually, that art can happen in that manner and in that context, conceptually. And we just wanted to find a new outlet. I wanted to find a new outlet with my work, something that can have some kind of scaffolding around it, preserve it, and keep it in the minds of people from watching it go by you in a flash of a second. Now, I'm going to look at this much more in a much more subjective way. And it just became, it was that crucible that we all found ourselves in at that time, that we knew that we had exhausted. At least I felt I exhausted everything that I could do on a subway car or even on a handball court, and that I wanted to bring it to the next level and deliver that envelope fully packed and loaded.
Yeah. You know, because that's the thing, is like how many, like, John, when you did your show, how many of those writers actually had a studio practice? I mean, I know Lee's early work, and you can see how much he loved comics too.
That show Futura did, which Futura and Zephyr were sort of
Right.
coming in and out of Sam Esses before.
Right, and Ali, that whole kind of scene with Esses.
Most of us were painting on rooftops. Those were our studios.
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of, yeah, maybe 2 or 3.
My studio was an abandoned subway tunnel underneath City Hall.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Can I just
Please,
add
go ahead,
something?
yeah.
Is shout out to this man, because he is a visionary. Like, first guy to look at a train and not be content with just taking a panel on the train, feeling the need to paint an entire train, right? And that entire handball court, like I covered graffiti for the Source magazine for almost 11 years. And it wasn't until the early 2000s where painting an entire handball court was actually normalized. He had raised the bar 2 decades plus before this was a normal thing. You know, I mean, maybe in the inside, and I'm an absolute graffiti nerd, so this is probably why I know this is inside of spray can art. There's a wall by Venn, Rise, TMB, which are 3 handball courts side by side that are painted in its entirety. But the actual practice of painting an entire handball court didn't really become normal until the early 2000s. I remember cutting school and going to Henry Chalfont's studio when I was 12 years old, and Lee was in the back of the studio, and he was absolutely legendary. I was in summer camp, and we were passing Union Square, where you had the piece with the pyramid and the mummy, and I just got back from the Middle East, by the way, but you had this piece with the mummy in it, and I remember thinking to myself, what the hell is that? And everyone that I was with was like, yo, bro, that's a Lee, and none of these people wrote graffiti. So this is how common the information was, that it traveled at breakneck speed. There was this like sort of grapevine. If there was a fight in the Bronx, guys in Brooklyn were talking about it in the lunchroom the very next day. There was no internet, there was no social media. And again, there were probably a host of creative liberties that were taken while passing along this story, but he was just like a legend. And it took me, it felt like a journey of 1,000 miles getting from Fort Greene to Henry's studio in Soho. In the fact that he was working on a painting that was destined for London. I believe there was a Frankenstein or something in it. And the notion of London, you might as well said that this was going to Mars or like Kepler 7, right? Like, it just, for somebody that had never left his neighborhood before, it kind of gave me an idea of possibility and what is possible. At least it planted the seed somewhere in the back of my head that this might not be so localized and that there might be greater opportunities to continue to do this thing. But shout out to this man right here.
But now we got to give him a little shit, because we are in a culture where muralism is quite dominant, and it's part of something called placemaking, if anyone wants to know the really evil real estate terms attached. But, you know, in a way, it's contiguous with a lot of other artists who were inspired by what was going on in the subways, and they decided to make art on the street, right? And it wasn't necessarily graffiti. So we have, at that time, a first generation of like what we could call street art, and it's before Shepard or Banksy in that moment. And I kind of remember at that time, a lot of old writers sort of getting a little annoyed with me for getting in bed with that generation, because there was a sense that maybe street art was kind of, by being so present tense, that it was putting graffiti in the past tense. I don't know if you guys ever experienced that at all. So, and we can look at street art in a way as being maybe a little more accessible to people who don't understand all the styles involved, and maybe sometimes a little whiter, maybe a little less DIY. But I'm just curious, like, if we're gonna, and Charlie, you taught a class on street art, didn't you? Kind of like SVA, wasn't just graph, right? You were kind of,
Yeah.
so let's talk about this lineage and try to make it whole instead of breaking it apart into opposing
Are
camps.
you referring to street art?
Street art being versus graffiti. Street art being all sorts of different other modes of expression in public
Like
space.
I took the J train to come out here and got off at the Bowery stop, which is on Delancey. Got off, there's Supreme right in front of me. When I got off, on the Bowery is this, you know which building it is. It's right on the Bowery, and it's, you know, street art is all over it. And then I walk up 2 blocks and there's a Banksy show. It says held over. Held over, there's no one in front of it, there's no big line, but it says Banksy, and there's the Banksy show, and I think, that's sort of like what we're talking about.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm being really sarcastic. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, yeah.
How can I not?
And Banksy has nothing to do with that show,
No.
just to be clear.
I'm not blaming anybody.
But, I mean, am I just totally whack, or do you guys feel a continuum, or do you feel a real, like, kind of psychic break between this history of graffiti, which is as ancient as letter forms are, so it goes way back, and then other people doing things on the street? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I mean, when, you know, going back to the subway era, the emphasis was to create a persona, you know, create a character. And whether it was a made-up name or a real name or derivative of that name, abbreviated or not, you needed to create something that you felt that you could stand with, a pillar that you felt was part of your persona. And it gave you street cred, it gave you a sense of purpose, to have a conversation with strangers from all over the town. I mean, talk about Instagram now. I always like to playfully call it like Insta-damn, look at that car. You know, because people, I was always wondering, like, who is Cliff 159? And what's his home structure like? And how's his neighborhood? And how is he accepted within his peers? And I knew that I had my small circle of people, so I wanted to expand on that. I wanted to create more, to sort of open the aperture of just not just myself and my name, but a narrative that goes, a visual narrative that goes along with that name. And I think I could speak highly for, you know, some of my peers that, and there were very, very, very few that came out of that really austere environment of the subways and made a studio practice the practice of their lives. And that most of, you know, there were some greats that were on the trains that did not transition into the fine arts, and there were very few that did transition into the fine arts, and it was, I think, that we were able to dislodge ourselves from just the name and create more of a narrative, just as Johnny's paintings and Daze's and you know, a number of other painters that have been able to feel comfortable out of the context of just your name, that you wanted to create some kind of conversation within that painting, because in the end, it is a community of people that are experiencing that work. And you are not allowed, as the artist, as the creator, to only be the person that finishes that work. That work is finished by thousands, maybe even millions of people that experience it and see it in different ways. And I think that right there dictates that it needed to be beyond just the name and just the letters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because the conversation is so wide. I've said this a bunch of times. All we are just messengers, you know. Ours was a youth-oriented, defiant art, and to this day, you know, the conversation now has changed because we've advanced in ages, so now they look at us and like, well, you guys are the pioneers. Like, no, we're not. We just happen to be at the right place at the right time. But this is what Graph is all about. And I just need to say one thing, that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for a lot of writers. And I mean writers like yourself, Rene Ricard, people who identify with what we're doing and push the narrative where we couldn't do it. Where it was a headset that was higher than where we were.
And can I just add that, graffiti's the one thing that we haven't touched on is that graffiti's a language. I was a small child seeing these complicated letter forms pass by me, and my untrained eye wasn't sophisticated enough to maybe decipher some of these complicated letter forms. And it was the characters from popular culture that spoke to me. Seeing The Thing, or Snoopy, or Mickey Mouse from Fantasia, and Subway's a scary place. I'm with my mom.
Well, you also worked on that amazing book, Mascots and Mugs, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
So
which really brought
we
that
wrote
language
a book
out.
on the subject, which is sort of like a chronological evolution of figurative drawings next to illegal graffiti. It's maybe a 40-year study, which kind of starts with Stay High stick figure and then goes through the years, and we kind of highlight some of the guys that have broken ground or created trends, Mark Bodie, Vaughn Bodie, and there are a host of other people, sort of end in the Barry McGee, Brian Cause era. But it's a 40-year sort of chronological study, but at the end of the day, graffiti is a language. And I've gotten off the airport in Bangkok and just been intimidated by the signs because I don't speak the language, but it's the figurative drawing that spoke to me. I knew exactly where the bathroom was and the taxi was and where the payphone was through this figurative drawing. So I understand the frustration within the graffiti community that there are a host of people that started painting 50 years ago that are sort of waiting for their just due, but they're a part of this language, or this, they're still hosting a conversation that isn't a dialect that is familiar to everyone just yet, right? So, I look at sports, or especially skating and graffiti culture, are almost sort of very similar in the sense that it was a rite of passage growing up in New York. Everyone I know had a skateboard. I was no good at it, so I didn't last long. And then there were a handful of kids that got better, and there were a small handful of kids that got great, and there were a select few that became widely recognized for exactly what they did. And I think that graffiti has that very same merit, right? Like there's a very same path to success via graffiti. But the amount of times that Tony Hawk was probably chased off of a steps somewhere, and these same people would do anything to sort of have him back. And the whole idea was that there was a platform that was user-friendly. He had the X Games, where he could kind of bring what he did into the everyday world, and people, you didn't have to bring your kid into a seedy schoolyard somewhere. You were in a family-safe environment. And it's really sort of education through entertainment, is figuring out how to engage people, but what's really missing is education and understanding. So, there's sort of been this little goal of mine throughout the years, is to sort of salute people and hopefully create value in living artists while they're still here, so that it doesn't sort of become Raiders of the Lost Ark the second they're dead and everyone runs out to buy something. They find out that someone was living because they're now deceased. But the idea was trying to create value for artists who are living, and sort of saluting them while they're here, and hopefully presenting them with opportunities while they're still here. And one of my biggest disappointments with graffiti, and I think you touched on this, is that there's a blueprint for it with street art, and it's sort of been used as a Trojan horse for gentrification. So more often than not, wherever you see street art flourishing, whether or not it's Wynwood or downtown Los Angeles near Skid Row, or where 5 Points used to stand, or even Bushwick, like somewhere behind all of those beautiful murals that people are taking photos of, there are cranes and green construction boards up left and right everywhere. So it's sort of problematic, but I understand how people connect with it. It's a figurative drawing. It's good art at the end of the day. I'm not here to validate it. I have tons of friends that do street art that have gravitated from traditional graffiti space into fine art careers. And I know a ton of people that have just signed up that are amazing painters. But I think, graffiti is a language, and more often than not, we were judging our peers on their ability to stylishly manipulate the alphabet. And the more complicated it became, the harder it became for everyone else to read. And most of the people were left out of that conversation. And I think that it's an easier connection to maybe seeing something painted on a figurative drawing on your wall. So.
And I just want to add to that, since you brought up skate cultures, because you've done such a great job, Dave, in a kind of historical mode. But one of the things I liked about skate culture and graph is that they actually, they don't suffer the same amnesia as a lot of other popular cultures or vernaculars. There's a lot within skate culture and within graph culture where there's a lot of memory, as you say, like these kind of like legends get passed on or things like that. So, Charlie, I want you to weigh in on this.
Dave, I like what you just said.
But-
Everything, but. No, I said that is one of the major point. Like, really, you said it in a way that was, you could say that internationally, exactly. The construction right behind the street art. The street art is in the front, the construction is in the...
And at the same time, landlords are putting up notices in all the art schools advertising studio space. It's kind of, it's all...
It's all related.
And also the state offers RFPs. So East New York, for instance, someone forwarded me this RFP 2 years ago, and they were giving out these small like stipends to artists that wanted to create these temporary art installs at the Broadway Junction hub. And I remember years ago hearing Marty Markowitz say that they were going to try and use that corridor at East New York, Broadway Junction, to start developing East New York and Brownsville, right? So when I saw that, I was like, dude, I want no part of this, and I kind of explained to him what was going on. But it's a real tactic and technique that's used, and wherever there's gentrification and big buildings going up, you know, a lot of that art is sort of on a temporary display until the glass facade building goes up.
Yeah. Well, this has all been so comfortable. I want to make it a little more difficult. I want to, if mainstreaming is just like a kind of a nicer substitute term for like commercialization or commodification, I want each of you to share like your cringe moment, because you've all been offered like lots of shit. So your cringe moment of like, where you were like, hell no, I can't do that, or wow, I wish I hadn't done that.
I got one.
You got one.
It actually happened this past summer. Out in Queens, every year we've been painting out in Queens, this particular spot. I don't want to say where it is, but you all know where it is. And the woman that runs the event emailed everybody saying, hey, this has been a very difficult year and a half, and this whole thing with the women's abortion rights and this and that. I want all the artists to do their work with either the tone regarding what's happening with abortion, or, you know, I'm like, hold it. So what do you mean? Then I emailed everybody. I responded to everybody. I said, listen, you don't tell me what to paint in a public forum. That's not how it goes. You don't tell me what to paint in a private forum. That's not how it goes. You're asking me to paint a mural for the last 10 years. You haven't paid for anything. You know, we're just doing this at the goodness of our hearts, and you're asking me to paint something that, regardless of how I feel, you just don't tell me what to paint. Now, I want to say there were 10 artists in that group, 5 of them left because of my, you know, and she refused to apologize. So other artists came in and did what they wanted to do, but since when? You know what I'm saying? I mean, if I want to do something, whether it's pro or against, that's up to me. You don't dictate that. And street art, you know, graffiti, no. And that was recent.
And that's really funny. It's coming actually from kind of the community itself, because
Yes.
we expect us to be the landlords, the property owners, to be telling you what to paint.
I was on that email thread.
Okay, so he knows. But
Pacino did it.
How did you react to that?
I erupted.
By the time I discovered it, there was a conversation already.
Okay.
And I was just content not having to add on. Everyone before me did an amazing job of advocating for themselves, so I just kind of sat back like, okay. I've benefited from everyone else's hard work. So.
Good.
Charlie, you got one?
I don't have a good story for that.
No. Were the Mountain Dew ads good for you?
Excuse me?
You did Mountain Dew ads, right? Was that good for you?
That was not Martin Dew. That was Sprite.
Sprite. Oh, sorry.
Are you fucking kidding? First
There's
of
some
all,
brand loyalty.
Let me give you some information.
No, dude. I think it's all about sustaining a career.
Me. Let me give you some information.
He made you uncomfortable.
When I was approached by the Burrell Company in Chicago to do an ad for Sprite. They had just done a Sprite ad with KRS-One.
Good enough for Chris.
I don't know if I've said anything yet. I said everything. In other words, if I were following KRS-One, who was my hero and most radical and didn't give a fuck artist out there, then I thought, this can't be too bad. Let's see what they're interested in doing. And the second part is that Wild Style was not in distribution for 5 years. It was not known to anyone. It was basically a legend that a film had existed, but where did it go? What happened to it? And they did 3 ads or 4, and one of them was the basketball scene. And they included, I wish I could tell you the right, real people that they had. They used Grandmaster Caz, they used Prince Whipper-Whip, and then they put against those 2 guys 2 of the biggest, and give me some help if anyone knows, who were like the top basketball people, probably from Chicago right at that moment. In the same scene, and I'm sure that our dudes were standing on many apple boxes for that scene to take
Charlie, it was Shaquille O'Neal.
Shaquille O'Neal, maybe. I don't know. That may be. Shaquille O'Neal did a song in which he used Kev's rhyme, y'all can't ball, y'all can't ball. And then he asked if he could use that rhyme, and I said, it's up to Kev. He called up Kev's mom, Barbara. Barbara answered the phone and said, yes, and it's Shaquille O'Neal. And she's like, Kevin, it's Shaquille O'Neal. He's on the phone. And he came over, and basically, to make a long story short, he got a check directly from Shaquille O'Neal.
Beautiful.
And thought that was going to happen after this every month. But it didn't. But it did happen, though, just like that. And I'm just trying to show you that, in a sense, you never fucking know, right? It's like, how do you make these boundaries, and how do you make your decision? But that helped take the movie from being a legend to being maybe something that should be distributed again.
Yeah, and I never...
Because you can't take for granted, people look at things from the other side of the telescope and think, oh, you're a commercial movie, right? You're a commercial movie. You always had, it's as if you were always such a big deal. That's not the way it works. I'm sorry, I'm talking to you. I should be talking to you.
He's preaching to the choir here.
You should remind me not to look at Carla. Because really, it's you that we're trying to communicate with. And the point is that they also did a stoop rap scene. They had Nas and AZ on the stoop. Are we talking the same language? I mean, I know you guys are just graph heads and you don't know anything about hip-hop, but these are 2 people that are hardcore, political, advanced artists that are in hip-hop that were at the top of the game right at that moment. That is a great thing for me to have them come out, to have Nas. You know what happened with Nas? That's a long story, but I'm saying that this was happening right at a moment in '96 before anything had started to really come back and happen. I don't remember the date exactly, but I'm saying that this was, yes, it was a check.
No, but that's...
Yes, it created a lot of like, whoa, whoa, whoa. People were all like, what the hell's going on and everything. And we're like, okay, chill. We're going to figure this out. But the point is that it was great working with Burrell Agency, having a Sprite ad. I love Sprite. You know what I'm trying to say? I mean, it's not about Sprite. It's about fucking Nas. And it's about KRS-One. And it's about that basketball scene and getting my people next to the best basketball players in the world. on TV with with the Wild Style logo flashing behind them. It's like, whoa, this is advertising Wild Style.
So,
So that's my answer.
That's a great answer. I don't want to let Lee off, because maybe, Lee, you have less things you regret doing than maybe things you regretted saying no to, but you got a cringe for us?
I mean, I can give you a long-winded question and answer about, like, you know, what's going on in the scene. I mean, I have to first start by saying that it's funny that 45, 50 years ago, society pointed fingers and said, those kids are misdirected and they are as vile as ever. And now the tables have turned and people will come into my studio and say, where's the graffiti? I'm like, the graffiti is a state of mind. It's not a thing. And it's not what you want it to be now, 50 years later. Because the irony is, it's like you shunned us away and now we're celebrated. And that's great. We're in a very, very important part in all of our lives. But I have to say to the artist that, and this is only because of what I've been called by other artists, Lee's a difficult artist. I am not a difficult artist. I'm an artist that's protecting my rights. And I'm protecting the rights of my work that I put up all those years. And some of my friends in my neighborhood that I grew up with were saying, years ago they were saying, Lee, you're so lucky. I'm like, there is no such thing as luck. It's hard work, not relying on good luck. And my hard work was my work. You were chasing girls, I was getting chased by cops chasing my dreams. So don't get it twisted. And I tell that to people now, people that are out of that sphere or whatever you want to call it, that I am here protecting my work. I am very rational. You can approach me, we can talk, because this is business. And the art of business is respecting the other side of the aisle and understanding the circumstances that that person or persons went through. You have to respect that, because if you're celebrating it now, it took a long time to get here in the first place. And I have always been, I'm a snob when it comes to food.
Yes.
I am. Chef Boyardee Lee, you are looking at him. And, you know, I can cook. And I can tell you that as a small child, I always was aware of what my intake was. And I was always like, wow, those guys are drinking that glow-in-the-dark, you know, whatever it may be, nuclear juice or whatever. I have said no, and proudly so, to companies that are trying to exploit my people in my circle, in my community, with spirits or whatever that are only going to keep them idle in those same corners for the rest of their lives. So I'd rather say no and sleep at night and know that my work speaks louder than even I can be, and that at the end, it is about the message. It's not really about when, you know, people say you're such an investigator. I'm like, yeah, maybe I investigate once in a while, but I like to reflect on life. I like to reflect that we do know what we're doing, some of us, and sometimes very maliciously we know what we're doing. And I like to just stand up to, even when the check is good, I'd rather say no, because I have to live with myself. And my work is my first vein, my weather vein. That's the way I direct myself. So again, I'm protecting my work because I'm actually helping protect all of the work at the end of the day.
Good. As always, well said, Lee.
John wanted to say something.
Oh, please, thanks, John.
Lee touched on something that made me think about something regarding that article in the Village Voice. In 1987, the Village Voice wanted to do a follow-up on all of us. It was at a time where we all hit a crossroad. The economy sucked, and people that were backing us abandoned us. And this is a fact. The Village Voice came out, and it was a scathing article. We all had to get jobs to support ourselves so that we can continue to paint in studios. I mean, I won't say, because we all know, what we were doing, but I myself, I was towing cars at night so I could paint during the day in my studio. So this is not as glamorous as people think it is. The 40-something years that we've been working, I want to say the last 10 years, we're starting to reap what we've been sowing. But before that, the struggle was very real. Every one of us has gotten screwed out of money with dealers, and we've had to go back on our own terms and break the windows of galleries to recoup, of what we lost. But just to let you know, that article, when it came out, we were just like, damn. I mean,
Yeah, and I think I got to know a lot of you actually really in your low times that way, because it was one of these things like Warhol's proverbial 15 minutes. And I feel there was kind of a failing on some of, my part and other people in the art world, because it was like Graff was like, it was so fresh and so new. It was like when you get a new style of music and all of a sudden every record in your collection sounds so passé you can't listen to it. And we all got caught up in that moment, and we never really did a good job articulating how it was part of a centuries-long conversation in Western art that goes through centuries and through cultures and stuff. And anyway, I do remember you guys paid some fucking dues. Yeah, please.
While we're on,
at that time, a few of us were approached by what we call schlock artists, schlock galleries, offering to pay us, cents on the dollar to do prints so we can make money. And we all just like, nah, we'll just work until this thing gets straightened out. I'm sorry.
no worries. I walked into the culture after these guys were already getting their feet wet. So they probably had to bear the grunt of a lot of the misconception that this is a real art form. You don't offer your mechanic a wrench and be like, there's my car, or a hammer to the carpenter, like, I need a shelf built, here's a hammer and some nails. It's a real, it's labor, it's work, it's construction. It's something that everyone here has risked their life and limb to develop a skill that's a valuable skill. I've been offered all of these weird, I grew up in an industry or during an era where it was more common to do corporate things. The window that my post-graffiti era was sort of fused with corporations trying to do collaborative events.
Marketing, yeah.
All sorts of things. And I've had to turn down a ton of bad ideas. Arguably the worst was a graffiti house reality TV show, which just, I knew in the first 30 seconds of them unpacking this thing that this was never going to happen, or at least not with me present. But it seemed,
I would have liked to have cast that one.
So one of the most recent terrible ideas was I curated an event for Art Basel, not this one, but 10 years ago. Revolt Television. They were a brand new network, and Puffy had Ciroc out. I got Montana Spray Paint involved. We hired some artists to paint the backdrop. Miami Heat were involved, French Montana. It was this big production thing. It was a broadcast piece. And their marketing team's like, all right, so you got spray paint, we got alcohol, let's give everyone a can of paint. And I'm like, you're gonna give out spray paint like at an open vodka bar? Like, everyone here is gonna get arrested on the way home. No one can take this on the plane with them, so they're gonna have to discard it at some point. And all of these beautiful murals in Wynwood are gonna get crossed out by drunk people writing their name on route out of the party. So really, the idea over the years is it's sort of my job to save these corporate entities from wasting their money and taking their bad ideas and trying to meet them in a space where it's actually suddenly a good idea or a viable idea. And I literally just turned down a check from a museum 2 days ago, and it's just trying to set a standard for myself. None of the projects that I do are about getting paid. I don't think I'm gonna get rich making a book or doing a show or a video. The whole idea is making meaningful contributions along the way and trying to do things that resonate warmly with people and that are warmly embraced. And that's really the goal of it, right? Is that I know there are people out there with similar interests as me, and there's not a lot of people out there in a position to get that done. So that's really what it's been. It's never been about like, I think this is gonna get me rich. This is a great opportunity. It feels good to my soul, and that's what it is. But again, I spend a lot of time saving people from terrible ideas. And if we can't meet somewhere with this, then it's probably not for me, and maybe someone else will benefit from this opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me, I'm not sure if it's a good, you know, I just was reading yesterday on Jim Stewart, who started, along with his sister, Stax Records.
Oh, yeah, he passed away.
Passed away back in the early 60s, and there was a gentleman that saw this rising music genre that was powerful and took it to the next level where it was more of a democratic involvement and sort of an event in making some of the greatest music that we all still play to this day. And I was like, yeah, Stax Records. I mean, you know, you compare that to 20th Century and a number of other record labels, like Stax really stood out.
He was also a white guy who came from country western music.
From the
it's
outside looking in.
And totally understood. I mean, if it weren't for him, a white guy like me never would have heard of soul music.
Right.
But I want to follow up a little bit with you, Chino, because when we're talking about mainstreaming, it's easy to think of the marketplace or of like really commercial things, but part of the way Graph does get mainstreamed is through institutions and through academia, through scholarship. And maybe you guys have some, I mean, I think it's kind of funny that there's kids doing PhDs on our squandered youth right now. But like, is this all good? I mean, I think it is, but what do you guys think?
Could I just scale it back a hair and just
Yeah.
insert the 90s? Because I think it was such a wildly important opportunity or window where graffiti was being mainstreamed, whether or not we realize this, is that, you know, my generation is probably the first generation to benefit from the advent of desktop publishing and its accessibility in homes. To their credit, Kell and Mayer were probably the two people that most of my generation were looking to. They were the gurus. They were the guys that actually owned computers, had Macintoshes that were using Illustrator, Quark, Photoshop, InDesign, or InDesign wasn't out, but Premiere and all of these Flash, and they were doing really involved things early on. And there was a community of guys like myself, Todd James, West, Dash FC, Wayne, and you know, we can make direct connections from having a computer in your home in what started to happen. You know, Wayne's developing logos for J. Rue the Damager, and Todd James is doing the Source Magazine logo, and the Kid Rock logo, and Say Adams is running the creative department at Def Jam Records. And there's all of these things that are now entering our homes. West, Surge, and Brew started PNB Nation. You know, GFS, Not From Concentrated, Gerb, Future, and Stash did the Philly Blunt t-shirt, right? Stash did Subware eventually, right? Recon, Project Dragon, and we can go on. But there was a community of people, Carl Weston doing Videograph, right? Sasha Jenkins hosting a segment on Videograph. You cannot turn on Showtime today and not find a Sasha Jenkins program on TV. He's easily got 15 shows in rotation, from Wu-Tang of Mics and Men, Louis Armstrong, Black and Blues on Apple TV, brilliant. The Rick
the
James
one about
bitching.
the freight trains.
Rolling Like Thunder,
Yeah,
Ricky
thank
Powell,
you.
The Individualist, This Is Video Music Box, Nas at the Kennedy Center, and we can go on and on and on. But he had a small segment on this show, right? West was doing P&B. He's now at Supreme, kind of running things over at Supreme. We look at like all of these folks that were doing creative stuff. Todd James has a creative, like a blue chip art career, but all of these guys that were sort of doing interesting things, the guys at Funny Garbage, you know, Peter Girardi and Chris Capuzzo did Crank Anchors, Law and Sub, New Wave. They were traditional graffiti guys, did a show that aired on MTV for 4 or 5 seasons, moved to MTV2. Peter runs the animation department at Warner Brothers, right? So there are all of these interesting people. I cannot turn on the television without seeing Mr. Cartoons in a Modelo commercial, right? But there was this era of the 90s that started to really bring Eli Gessner at Zoo York, an homage to Zoo York, the skate crew from Midtown. And there were all of these interesting industries that started to be birthed because people were doing creative design in-home and in their studio. You know, I was told in 1993, we'll give you extra $75 if you can give us your content for the Source magazine digitally. So I learned how to use a scanner, and visiting, say, a Def Jam, I learned how to use Illustrator, Quark, Photoshop, and I was inspired. But all of my generation sort of created all of this branding that came into people's homes, the apparel that came into people's homes. Stash is a sneaker legend by all accounts, right? And there are all of these fascinating people that sort of really kind of started coming into your home slowly but slowly. All of these graffiti zines, Greg LaMarche's Skills magazine. Shepard Fairey was at RISD. He was promoting the magazine. He was printing the magazine overnight in exchange for an ad in the back of the magazine, right? So there are all of these interesting connections between what's happening today, and if you follow that lineage into the 90s, there are a ton of people that were sort of... Mass Appeal magazine, you know, started by Patrick and Adrian Moeller. All of the television, and Nas is a partner in Mass Appeal right now, and they're doing movies, but all of those Showtime programming that Sasha's doing is through Mass Appeal. Stress magazine, Ket is now running the Museum of Graffiti. So all of these things sort of started to happen in homes, and I think it sort of set the tone or the environment for things to grow, like they were sprinkling seeds and inspiring people around the world. And people kind of got hip to, like, this is a viable option, but this, I think, for a lot of us was sort of the humble beginnings of, like, a lot of our creative journeys. Was like desktop publishing, having access to a computer in the 90s, and then it really kind of set the tone for things that are sort of happening today.
Yeah,
Dave,
what he just said.
The Tokyo connection, which comes right into,
Sure.
plugs right in from that. Of course, Futura,
Eric Hayes opened up
Eric
a shop.
Hayes opens up his own place, and they were just completely crazy. And of course, the Tokyo economy was very positive at that moment when it really looked at graffiti and thought, oh, this is what it is. And just
What year did you bring Wild Style there?
1983.
So that's really
So that might have been the
It
seed.
predated
That
it.
was the seed. That was the seed that
It
you
was
planted.
the seed. It got everybody interested in it. But then they went into clothes and of course DJing, they became incredible. DJ Crush was
Well,
like
Nigo
incredible.
was super important, and he
Right.
basically studied under Future in so many ways, and Cos,
Hayes-
and that's where
Hayes-
Brian gets his start.
Hayes was a powerhouse in Tokyo. What?
I said fucking Hayes, sorry, pardon me. One of my heroes, I'm sorry.
Still is. He just...
I mean, I know he's still.
I think
just
he's
got
over there
back
now.
from Japan.
More than ever.
I think he's there now,
He
actually.
just
right?
got
Yeah,
back,
we just got back.
We were sending, I was in the Middle East and he was in Japan, and we were DMing in the middle of the night because neither one of us could sleep, so.
All right.
All this is
I should
part of
open
the
up the-
mainstreaming of
to
whatever you want
questions
to.
soon. Couple little follow-ups. One, I'd be curious because when you're talking about, I've always had this hard part with what we call creatives, these people who enable all that stuff, because artists are like John. They're like, you don't tell me what to do. And creatives are the people who interface in that way, and they're very much about putting things into a box. So I think artists break the box. And then also I think we should follow up just real briefly on hip hop, because you raised an interesting thing there about how graffiti fits in with that, which isn't a perfect fit. It's a bit of a construction, but anyway.
Traditional graffiti has its, as we know, it has its roots outside of hip hop. And then there's a community of people. And again, depending on where you grew up and when you grew up, will determine what state the culture was in. So if you're born in the 90s and you go to a jam and they're writing graffiti and breaking and b-boying and rapping, it's sort of the same space. But for New Yorkers, there's, I guess, a separation. If you were part of that early, I talked to Blade and he's telling me he's listening to Jimi Hendrix while he's painting cars at Esplanade and, in the yard, and it's kind of like, he was like, I didn't know what hip hop was until the 80s. So he had this whole career of graffiti that was devoid of anything that resembled hip. It wasn't born yet as we know it.
And Scene certainly wasn't listening to hip hop.
No, not at all. But the 90s was an enormous turning point, I think, for the rest of the world. I had a column in the back of the Source magazine. It sort of grew from this quarter page where I shared a space with unsigned hype. But at the height of the Source's popularity, we reached roughly 2 to 4 million people a month. And we were sort of sandwiched in between all of this hip hop content. But, you know, there were groups like Lords of Brooklyn, Mike Caves, who grew up in Brooklyn painting double R's, right? He opened BMT lines, he had an apparel line there. He did Tales from the Rail, he was doing animation and cartoons. Tunnel Vision was doing graphic and web design. Artifacts, Wrong Side of the Tracks. They were signed to Big Beat by my buddy, Rob Tulo, who runs Apple Music now. Rob came from traditional graffiti, he wrote Reef. Rob signed Artifacts. Wrong Side of the Tracks was the first maybe mainstream 90s track that sort of celebrated graffiti, and then all of the branding from Mad Lions logo by Adrian Vargas, Todd James was creating logos for Redman, Say Adams. So there was, graffiti's footprint was all over the culture, sort of in the 90s, and then hip hop was sort of the driving force for a lot of these streetwear brands. PNB, Post No Bills, you know, all of those guys were doing cool hip hop stuff. And you know, so it was sort of, I think 90s hip hop really drove the market and sort of solidified a space for creatives that were involved in hip hop that came from graffiti. And then, you know, we look at Supreme, this gentleman's done a collab with them, and they continue to do Saint and Smith and J.A. and all of these fun, Martin Wong, and all of these amazing collaborations. This is Supreme. I peeked
But
it
I'll
when
wear
I walked
anything
in.
that's free.
Lee, were you into hip hop when you were a teenager?
Yeah.
I'm trying, because I feel like it
didn't exist.
People like to think of it, oh, well, he wasn't a rapper, he was a graffiti writer. But what were you into?
Yeah, my genre, like my palette of music goes all across from A to Z. But in the early years, I was listening to the seminal hip hop records that are celebrated today, like Jimmy Castor and, you know, James Brown and Baby Huey.
You
and
did
all
a beautiful painting series, which was the dozen records that became the breaks.
I know, but
Right.
I'm trying to
And
follow
those-
something with Lee.
So those
I'm
are
trying to
records-
follow Lee because Lee, you've told me how you would hear Just Begun from across the other side of the projects, and you would run into.
Oh, sure. I mean, any one of those incredible songs, records, everyone gravitated to the center stage to dance. And back then, breakdancing wasn't even a term. It was called burning on the floor.
Yeah.
So it was basically to
People
burn
don't
somebody
know
off the
this
stage.
about Lee, so
It was
I'm
the
trying
early
to
70s.
Bring this to the table.
Yeah. So I'm talking about the early 70s, 1972, 73, 74, into the mid-70s. I was listening to all the Motown and soul and break records that were the nucleus for the hip-hop movement that would explode later in the 80s. And the DJs at that time were spread everywhere, at least in the Lower East Side. At that time, at 15 years old, 14, 15, I was lifting records to go and sell those records to these DJs on the street for $1 a piece or whatever it was. There were maybe $2 in the store. I would come out with 10 albums at a time. And a friend of mine by the name is Cisco. And I learned that I was already now bringing this whole cachet of music to these guys so that they could play it for the masses. And then see everything that was exploding right in front of me were not only the dancing, but it was the fashion statements, people coming, and the attitude. And of course, disco got mixed in there, so the hustle was part of a big thing. But in between the hustle and the girls, you know, striking the pose, there were these guys that were just like staged up on the side, on the peripheral, ready to go and just bang it on the floor. So all of that. And Fred, I don't know if he ever mentioned this to you, Fred got his first glimpse at hip-hop in my projects, in the Alfred E. Smith projects, when he came to my house that year in 78, 79, and said, "Lee, what's that going on behind your building?" I was like, "Oh yeah, that's the guys jamming. That's Ice and Spanky jamming." He's like, "Yo, let me go." And he went there, and it was a crowd of like 1,000 people dancing. So it was like, it was already popping off in the streets in every neighborhood in the Bronx and Queens, Brooklyn, and all these records were part, and that's why I made that series called Prelude. And it was all based on me lifting records, and every one of them is a picture of my hands, just my hands grabbing that, whatever, Baby Huey album or the Futures or something, and just, you know, a stack of them. So it was that conversation that I was trying to bring up with
Well,
those.
cool. I think, should we?
Well, pre-hip hop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is kind of.
Yeah.
I just hate to have all this cut up and then served to people as if it's different things, as if it's unrelated
Right.
things, because it really makes me frustrated.
And it's good he
I'm
dropped,
sorry.
you dropped disco in there, because like,
Yeah.
to try to write disco out of that history is just like,
But you also had salsa too, so, you know, yeah.
I mean, I listened to Baby Huey and Lonnie Liston Smith going to the subway yards from my home. And then I would listen to Elton John and, you know, I would go all over the place. But that music was so important, integral in getting the attitude going and getting your sense of purpose and self-agency, and also self-confidence. Because you're going into an environment that was very dark and very lonely. And like, I forget the name of that film, like in outer space, no one can hear you scream. Right, I was like, no one can hear you scream in the yards neither. So, you know, what was screaming in my ears was the music that was ongoing in the streets.
That's what made taking pain from people in a tunnel so easy, is because no one can hear you scream.
Yeah,
do we have time for questions? What do you guys think? You want-
Yeah?
yeah, sure.
All right, you want to go? Kurt?
Yeah, my question is about museums, right? So you have the Museum of Graffiti, you have the Urban Museum in Berlin, the Martha Cooper Library, you have Strasbourg in the Netherlands. Do you see this art form kind of like having its own kind of museum world versus pushing into the Metropolitan Museum of Art or Museum of Modern Art? Maybe they're not accepting it, but they're kind of creating your own kind of respect for the art form. Could y'all elaborate on that?
Let me respond to that. But that's how we enter the art world. They didn't accept us. We kicked the door in. That's, you know, so what's happening with museums, some of us have been blessed, Lee and myself, are in certain museum collections, but that's, you know, perfect example, the Museum of Modern Art will not take our work easily, because most of them sit on the board of directors for the MTA. And that's why our stuff will lag to get into the Museum of Modern Art, or the Whitney, or, you know, any other museum. They sit on these boards, and because what we did with the MTA, it's held against us, and therefore, you know, it is what it is. So people are, Martin Wong was the first one that had the vision of opening up a museum for graffiti, because he saw that there was a need to get our stuff into a situation where it can be held up and looked at for years to come. So these museums, they're actually underlining what we've been saying all along.
So I think the truth is, the first museum that should probably embrace graffiti is the Transit Museum. And it's a difficult conversation to ignore a movement that was pioneered by small children in the early 70s that made these lasting, enduring contributions that are still practiced till this day, right? But it's a sizable chunk. Let's just, dare I say, 1970 to May 12th, 1989 was when the last carriage was pulled out. That's a sizable chunk of history to turn the blind eye to. So I think that that's the first place that graffiti should probably exist. History's not always pretty, but we can't ignore it. It's important in the retelling of a history, just that we acknowledge these things. But I think that, you know, to answer your question, progress is a process. I know it's felt like it's a long time coming, but I think that it's like we're closer than we've ever been to having something that's devoted solely. It's a matter of finding the interest. I think that education is wildly important to making, if it's something that just we care about, it has value just within this room. And you really have to educate people, tear down or deconstruct some of these negative stereotypes. Sadly, there's one word for graffiti. And it's like sort of like transportation, right? Like, how did you get here? Like a skateboard, the back of a donkey, a Cessna. Like, were you in a rocket? Like, it's sort of, there's this broad array of like activities that falls under that vague umbrella. But at the root of it, the word graffiti elicits all sorts of negative connotation, right? So it's deconstructing some of these stereotypes, educating people, and creating an environment where it's just not just important to us, but important to everyone else. And doing shows that involve young people is an amazing start. Like, I'm all for like old school and contemporary, But I think the hope lies with the younger generation, and then them not having these negative entanglements in what's the word I'm looking, connotation that come to mind, like when they think about graffiti. They know different, right? And that's the idea. But I think we're probably closer than we've ever been. And again, progress is a process. We're slowly making inroads into real museums and creating our own museums. So I think it's just a matter of time. I don't know if this is helpful.
Sure.
You should talk about this a bit.
Yeah, very quickly. As Chino just pointed out, progress is a process. And thank God that there's young eyes, fresh eyes looking and actually reflecting on what they grew up with. So you have not only the collector base, but you have the director base, the curator base, the museum bases, and the critique base, the journalists, that actually are now starting to look at this movement as a whole, very complicated, many moving parts. But you know, 40 years ago, when you're in the fire, you can't define the flames. It takes 30, 40 years away from those flames for you to be able to see how big that fire is. And now we know the fire is huge, and it's breaking at the seams with so much new energy, new commentary, and I think a whole new arsenal of artists that are going to have a lot to say articulately and romantically and all across the map. So I think that we'll keep the light on for you, as we say, you know, and it's coming, it's coming.
I just want to add to that because I will be really happy for the day when none of you cats have the word graffiti stuck in front of it. I just think you're artists, and it's great that there's graffiti shows, and it's great that there's graffiti museums, but you should be in there with the rest of contemporary art and ancient art and everything like that. So I'm not a big fan of the ghettoization. You want to recognize that? Fun Gallery, I think it's about Fun Gallery? Yeah, you want to talk about Patty or about fun? Yeah, John, you showed there. You showed there.
No.
Yeah, we were involved in group shows, yeah.
Yes, you were, yes.
I would like to say something about the Fun Gallery and crossover, and I'm sorry, I don't want to steal anybody's
No, please do.
thunder, but, you know, I know that at a point, Jean-Michel Basquiat tried to go home and have a show at the Fun Gallery because he was in mainstream galleries at that point, and the difficulty of going back, and I think what you've all talked about a lot is about the integrity within a community. And I know everyone on the walls here too has already become established, so that, you know, once you've made the choice to go mainstream, this difficulty of crossing over back, and I think you've spoken to, also you've answered all my questions really, but, you know, going back to the idea of maintaining the underground that feeds the mainstream, because that's a classic traditional cyclical thing that's been going on from the beginning of time. So, you know, this idea of selling out is just part of the process. So I think it's really important to talk about the struggle that someone, say, like Basquiat had in terms of once the money hits you and what do you do about that? I know at a certain point he just started saying it's not for sale, but it was too late. So I'm just wondering if you think there's any viability to hovering below the mainstream. Is that a valid position to take?
Good question, Brett. And that, by the way, his show sold no work, right? That's the Jean-Michel show at Fun, actually. You sold, but like, he didn't.
I don't know if Patty sold work.
No, absolutely nothing, not one piece
Okay.
out of the
But I
Jean-Michel.
think there is an opportunity to hover beneath the mainstream, and I think that, like anything else, there are levels to this. And, you know, you look at Marvel, right? The low-end licensing deal might be like Dixie cups and paper plates, and then the next tier might be figures, and then the higher tier is maybe the broadcast film, right? Or something like that. But there are levels to it, and if you can find the rhythm in your space, you can beast sort of somewhere in the middle or somewhere on the low end. Like, no one at Dixie Cup is upset about that licensing deal, right? But I think it's just a matter of making the best of your, like, there's opportunities on every level, and it's just a matter of, like, keeping your antennas up and understanding what's available to you.
All right, one last one.
So can I just ask a question? So I work in advertising and marketing, so I've been in those rooms where people are trying to put graffiti in the box. And one of the things I've seen over the last 25 years, and that's become more prevalent recently, is the elevation, not the elevation, but the interest in a certain group of people, right? You guys are a part of that, well served, right? And then everything else almost becomes a generic graffiti thing, right? So it's like, if we're not getting a stash, we're not getting a crash, we're not, or a fuge, then it's just, oh, graffiti, it doesn't really matter who's doing it. I know that, Chino, that you spent a lot of time in the 90s actually elevating not only, the people we all know are the masters, but also the unsung masters, right? And you talk about the youth. So where do you see that sort of next thing going? How does the youth then begin to break through what seems to be almost like a stasis, kind of like, everyone knows who the big names are, but there hasn't been that opportunity maybe to elevate some of the newer people? Or am I just looking at it from the wrong?
No, I think that you raised an excellent point, but the truth is that, like, and I appreciate you acknowledging, I've spent a long time shining the light on people whose work I think are dope. And, when I bring in like a Ribs, or I bring in a Doves, or I bring in a Cess early on, and people are like, why are you using these guys? And I'm just like, dude, like, Nova's dope. Like, I just got back from the Middle East. We brought Ascend from Chicago and Mast. They're both younger dudes. They crushed it. We were there painting a mural for the 51st National Day of the Kingdom of Bahrain, by the way, which was yesterday, December 16th. But I brought a team of relatively unknown artists. Their name's not in the hat. But the idea is just to remain steadfast, do what you do, stay humble, keep your antennas up, and work hard. Like, the rest of that, pardon the French, shit is like white noise. Like, you just have to do you. But people are making it. And, I watched Cess get a ton of criticism 20 years ago from, like, the older guys. And when it came everyone's turn to shit on Doves, I kind of had the same conversation with him, and I had the same conversation with Nova, and everyone's so aggressive and angry because you have a lot of talent, and one day you're gonna get there. But the truth is, the trajectory from, like, where they're starting and where they're going today is on steroids. I want to tell people, like, in another 10 years, I won't be surprised if, but I won't be surprised if by next year you're actually doing it because of social media, making inroads. It's amazing how many people see the stuff that people post on social media. It really is. But being able to connect with people at a different ability, and I think that this younger generation is so much more sophisticated, their ability to use Procreate, and already they have this digital experience baked into their journey already. They're filming recaps with GoPros, and they're using Adobe Premiere to edit video, and they're far more sophisticated, and I think that if we've gotten this far with the culture, this next generation is going to benefit tremendously from all of these interesting opportunities, but it's a matter of just, like, kind of closing your ears and doing the work.
Cool. Do you guys want to add anything, or
Hey, listen, we're going to benefit from those young kids.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just a bunch of vampires.
Speaking of young kids, there's one of my
There we go. All right, can we?
I think I'm only friends with Lee because
All right. Thanks, everyone. It's been really fun.